from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Ahead today, Oklahoma State University's Derrell with this week's cattle market segment. Derrell will talk about, among other things, the rush of feeder cattle sales this past week, and he'll comment on the possible cattle market impact as more and more states ease their pandemic restrictions. Then one of the featured speakers at K-State's Cattlemen's Day last Friday from Purdue University, Jayson Lusk, will comment on what may lie ahead for the beef cattle sector as the country emerges from the pandemic. And on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Anissa Jepsen talks with Jeff Wickman about a new video series for 4-H'ers in the Horse Project. All that and more straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Good to have you along once again. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Our cattle market segment comes your way first, and for that we go down the line to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and talk with livestock economist Derrell of Oklahoma State University. Quite an array of things we'll get into today, Derrell, but let's start with the look back at last week's trade, the feedlot cattle sector. Well, it looks like packers were waiting on feedlots. There was scant activity for the better part of the week.
Yeah, this cattle market is just really kind of sluggish right now. We've got plenty of cattle, and so that's not in the feedlot's favor. And we've had some weather disruptions, which I think we're getting cleaned up now, but everybody's kind of just, looking for direction here. And so we're just sort of plodding along right now, not really seeing the seasonal strength that we would expect to see in fed cattle, but trying to get to a point where maybe we can act on that a little bit.
Let's get into that as we'll look forward here shortly. But this past week, if there was the action spot, if you will, it was in the feeder market. You tell us that the auction volumes were pretty hefty?
In Oklahoma, of course, we had 2 weeks where some of the auctions were closed, at least 1 week, some of them 2 weeks during the storm. And, and I went back and looked at the volumes, obviously the volumes were way down during the storm, so we know we pushed off some cattle that would have normally been sold during that period. And now we're at the point, and it's warmed up a lot, and we've got wheat pasture that's coming on here with first hollow stem. And so when you put all that together, these auctions really recovered this week. We had a big volume in Oklahoma, and I would expect that we'll see fairly big volumes for probably at least 2 more weeks.
And there are plentiful feeder supplies out there in general. You've written about this recently. And as those start to come to market here, how well will prices hold up, do you think?
The feeder cattle auction this week, not really surprising. Again, we've had some warmer weather. The lightweight end of things, some guys are already looking ahead to green grass and that sort of thing. So the calf market was pretty strong, and the numbers are not big this time of year for that weight class, for those lighter weight classes. The bigger feeder cattle were actually down a little bit week over week, from last week. And so they continue to struggle a little bit. Part of that's a volume thing. We are seeing some pretty big volumes of these, anything from 6.5 weight up through 900 pounds. There's a lot of those cattle coming in now off of wheat pasture. So there's a little pressure on that market. And of course, the fact that feed prices are up and all of those things that are kind of coming at us with respect to higher feed prices kind of weighing on that market as well.
And that is one of those elements that seems to be hanging in there in the market, and that is those feed costs are shifting the flow of feeders to the feedlots in a bit of a different way, aren't they?
That's right. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about high feed prices and how that will affect, protein production across the various species. And I remind folks in the cattle industry, it's not that we're not going to feed cattle this year, even with higher grain prices. Those cattle are out on the ground. They're coming through the system. The pipeline is kind of filled up right now. So we're going to feed cattle, but feedlots will certainly look at those decisions a little bit differently in a high feed price environment. they're going to be more interested in buying more pounds on the front end, buying them a little bit heavier, reducing days on feed, and reducing that total feed bill in those animals. So as we go through the next 3-4 months and those higher feed prices really begin to be reflected in feedlot rations, I think we'll see more of that dynamic play out here, as we move towards the middle of the year.
Well, Derrell, you noted that there are signs that the demand for those lighter weight grass cattle starting to show here. Size that up, if you would, as you look a few weeks ahead. And we're looking at grazing seasons as the calendar goes, but we're also looking at some awfully dry conditions out there. So how do you see that fleshing out?
Well, yeah, that's right. It's going to depend a lot on where we are. Obviously, the drought map is a little bit concerning as we look at it, obviously in the western part of the country. And if it continues to look like that and the weather patterns would suggest it's not going to change a great deal, then as we get into, April, May time period, there'll be more impacts in that farther west country, and that'll affect some of the stocker industry. There's some short grass prairie country that normally has stockers that may struggle this year. Now, right now, the moisture conditions are a little bit better across kind of central Oklahoma, maybe south central Kansas. So I think, at this point in time, probably the prospects for, Osage country and Flint Hills grazing probably looks relatively decent at this point. But, again, it's early in the spring. We've got to see how conditions develop.
Want to reflect back just for a moment here, if we might. It's been a couple of weeks now, or actually pushing 3 weeks now, since those awful cold temperatures hit the central and the southern plains, and we've documented that repeatedly here. Are we getting a sense of the actual damage to the cattle industry in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma from that situation?
We are. I mean, it's pretty anecdotal right now. We don't have a lot of really good firm data, particularly on things like cattle losses. The folks down in Texas have made some estimates of cattle losses. I haven't made, and I haven't really seen in Oklahoma, specific dollar estimates. I think most of the costs are going to be reflected in higher costs to the operations involved, whether it's a cow-calf operation or a feedlot or whatever, that face higher feed costs and extra labor and all of those kind of things, as well as some cattle losses. Now, I have been asking around about cattle losses, at least in Oklahoma, and my sense is that they're not the magnitude of numbers that will affect the market in an aggregate sense, but certainly they're important for individual producers. We've had mature animals falling through ice into ponds and not surviving that. We lost some newborn calves. Again, I think those total numbers are probably not that big, but they're pretty big when they're year numbers. And so I think for individual operations, again, it's part of that total cost, and it is a significant cost.
And we wish a speedy recovery to those operations who are now rebounding from whatever types of losses were taking place on their operations during that polar experience. Briefly on the demand side, anything new on the export front to note?
The indications are that exports are still moving pretty strong. We're kind of in between as far as our monthly data, but the weekly data suggests that we're still moving some meat, and I think there's reasons to be pretty optimistic about that export situation. Now, if you look at the box beef market, which encompasses that as well as domestic market conditions, in the last week we've seen the choice box beef drop about $9 from about a $240 peak down to about $231 the end of last week. But I think that's more of a kind of a monthly cycle kind of a thing and a seasonal demand thing. I don't see it as a major problem. Some of that may have reflected some storm impacts that pushed it maybe a little higher than it would have gone, and then we've come back off of that as we move past those storm disruptions. So all of those factors in place, even though the box beef has dropped a little bit, I'm not concerned that we have any significant or ongoing underlying demand problems.
Associated with that, it appears, although things can change seemingly daily now, that at least parts of the country are opening back up, are moving away from the pandemic-induced restrictions, and perhaps restaurants and other outlets will be open for business more fully and hopefully attract customers back in. How do you see that impacting the beef cattle trade and our markets? Is that going to be a slow roll as far as those impacts?
I think it probably is. I think it's an ongoing process. We are, slowly making some progress on that food service side, and that's a good thing. And obviously, for specific beef cuts, the restaurant-driven menu items will pick back up a little bit. I think that's probably going to happen over the next few months. And at the same time, there are some folks that are concerned about what happens to retail grocery demand when we shift back to food service. And frankly, there's a lot of unknowns right now. We don't know what this experience has done to sort of overall consumer behavior. Are folks going to continue to cook and eat at home? Are they going to really return to the restaurants in droves when they get the chance? I don't think anybody knows at this point. I think the bottom line is it will have some impacts on specific components of the beef markets and specific products, but overall demand, I think, is going to be good. People are going to continue consuming. They've been very robust in that, beef spending, and it's going to happen. We're not quite sure where yet or exactly how, but I think it's going to continue.
That's the encouraging part of how resilient the industry has been through all of this. And as we finish up here, you look at the markets this coming trading week. Any trends that you're sensing are taking shape here?
The fed cattle market, again, is really trying to look for some traction. I really think we will see some traction develop. I don't know if it happens yet this week. I think we've still got, probably a little bit of sluggishness in there, trying to get a little bit ahead of these numbers. But I do think it's going to happen. And so as we move through, maybe not this week, but over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I really do expect to see some support in that fed cattle market. The feeder cattle market we've already alluded to. There's kind of some springtime demand for the grazing-type cattle, the lightweight end of the feeder market. I think, again, it's going to depend on weather and other things, but that's pretty encouraging at this point. The bigger feeder cattle will depend on, obviously, they're facing these higher feed costs, but also looking at really how quickly we move these feedlot cattle out and kind of make room for some more, if you will. Feedlots are relatively full right now. And so it's a matter of keeping that flow moving through the feedlot sector.
Well, your input's always appreciated on these markets, Derrell. In a few weeks, we'll touch base once again, see what's happening on this front. Meantime, take care. Thank you.
You bet. You're welcome.
Derrell Peel along with us regularly for the cattle market segment. He is a livestock economist at Oklahoma State University. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Agriculture Today returns now, and with thoughts on the U.S. beef cattle industry, hopefully on the backside of this pandemic. One of the featured speakers at K-State's 2021 Cattlemen's Day, held virtually last Friday morning, was the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue University, who's also formerly an agricultural economist at Oklahoma State University, and before that, a graduate researcher in agricultural economics here at K-State. Jayson Lusk was invited to speak about the impacts of the pandemic on the beef cattle sector, and he walked through the ebb and flow of that as it occurred over the last year. Jayson's remarks prompted a number of audience questions. But not only did he look back, he keyed on what's ahead for the cattle sector moving forward, including in the beef demand arena.
What's happening with retail prices, we've seen the inflation start to come down, but still at a fairly high level. We see a lot more purchasing of food through online channels. I think we'll continue to see that even for meat. We just recently did a survey last month of consumers, and about 25% said they bought meat online within the last month. So I think that will continue to be a trend as we go forward. I think it's probably the case that grocery stores may in the future start to look a little different. There's, in some cases, as more food is being bought online, some of these retailers may find it profitable to create these little micro-fulfillment centers, what they're calling dark grocery stores. Essentially, all they're doing are filling all the online orders that are now taking place inside the grocery store. I think we'll probably see a push towards automation, particularly in the packing sector. Labor has been an issue for a long time, and I think we just been a different dimension of labor challenges for that industry. And so I think investments in automation in that sector, and maybe even in the food retailing sector, is one that we're likely to see.
Now, the restaurant sector, says Jayson, remains something of a wild card.
Who knows exactly how the food service sector is going to come out of this, what's going to happen to restaurants. I think some fast food chains have probably been just fine. At least sales through drive-thrus have remained fairly strong, but in the more sit-down kind of traditional restaurant sector, it will be interesting to see how it plays out. People have spent more time cooking at home and may be something that they stick with more than they have in the past. Even before the pandemic, there was a rise in what you call these ghost kitchens. These are restaurants that don't have the front of house. Basically, they're a website that are filling orders through, DoorDash, Grubhub, those sorts of things from a kitchen. And I think we'll probably continue to see more of that again as people become accustomed to ordering food and eating online.
And Jayson added the nature of the processing sector may look at least a shade different in the months ahead.
I think, partly because of some of the shutdowns that we saw in meat packing, there's been, I think, a rising interest in sourcing meat from local segments, maybe direct delivery from small, more medium-sized packers. I think that is an opportunity that will grow, and there'll be some niche marketing opportunities there. It'll probably remain a small piece of the overall story, but I think still an opportunity that does exist for certain entrepreneurs.
More on the production side then, a question came up about the infusion of dollars created by the government pandemic assistance to cattle producers, along with everyone else. Would that create any changes in the normal course of beef production? Would it perhaps cause a shift in the cattle cycle or some similar change? Would it lead to producers altering their scale of production? Jayson had this to say.
It's a good question, and I'm not going to claim to know exactly. My crystal ball is a little cloudy at the moment, but I think the number one place those dollars are going to look to go is probably in land values. So in general, I think economists tend to think that when you get an infusion of money, it's going to tend to flow to those places that are relatively fixed assets or something that's a little special. So we're not going to create a lot of extra land. And so the owners of that land are going to tend to attract more of that capital either through land prices or through higher rental rates. The other one is people that have special talents in management or have patents or proprietary technologies. Those things that you can't really replicate more of is often the landing spot for a lot of that money. Now, one of the things we're seeing happening is on the grain side that prices are getting pulled up, and I don't know how much that's due to the infusion of cash from the government as opposed to other things like bad weather this summer that hit the Midwest and China. But that will affect the cattle cycle because we've got feed prices that have increased quite significantly over the course of the past several months. And that will affect decisions, I think, of whether folks decide to hang on to some inventory or to let them go if it's going to cost too much to keep them around.
On another different tangent, a question coming from the audience about those occasions when a group or even a government official, as happened recently in Colorado, call on the public to abstain from meat consumption for a day or even longer. Have those negatively impacted the beef cattle industry? Jayson said, for one thing, that would be a prime subject for closer study.
It's a good research question and one I have not seen addressed. So I think there are a number of locations that have had those kinds of things. California, some locales in California have had a similar Meatless Monday kind of phenomenon. So one thing that I think has been pretty remarkable over really the course of the last 5-6 years is that the measures of beef demand have remained very strong. And that's occurred over a time period where there's been a lot of negative publicity directed at beef, whether it's the health things. We had the World Health Organization that came out a few years ago, and the bacon and red meat causes cancer scare that came out. In addition to that, there's been all the concerns about climate emissions and that sort of thing. Despite all that, our measures of demand look pretty strong. Now, maybe they could have been stronger if it wasn't for some of this adverse attention that the industry attracted. But nonetheless, I think the industry seems to have weathered that storm pretty well. Where I would probably keep my eye out as an industry is maybe less on these sort of public pronouncements, voluntary cutting back, if you will, which my guess is that those probably have very minimal impacts. is that you do see some locales that are turning those into policy actions. So if you have a locale that says, not only we're going to have a meatless Monday, the municipal cafeterias and, municipal dollars or even school dollars won't be spent on meat on Monday. I think that's where or the city and local governments or even state governments might control. Those are a little more problematic. And I did a report a few years ago for the American Meat Institute, now NAMI, and trying to get a sense of what would happen, if we did saw some of these different policies enacted in different locations. And, unsurprisingly, the answer is negative. That, if you're an industry, you don't want to see these things come your way.
And one more item that was brought up in that question and answer session, how Jayson perceives what was termed greater vertical alignment in the beef production industry, and with that, the flow of production information that often accompanies it. Jayson suggested that producers can seize upon the opportunities presented.
Probably because of these changes in price spreads that we've seen, there already is a lot of increased scrutiny over concentration, anti-competitive behavior. All that I think is happening at the same time as we're also seeing a lot of really interesting movements in terms of vertical integration in the sector. We're seeing retailers getting into the packing space. We're seeing some packers trying to get into direct-to-consumer markets. So I think it's a really interesting and dynamic time. And I think for cattle producers, it's interesting, will be important strategically to see how you can be a part of some of those changes that are happening.
The cattle producers I know are a very independent bunch. Nobody wants the government tracking who they are and where they are. I completely get that. At the same time, you got a system where consumers are wanting to know more about where their food came from. And you kind of can't have it both ways. For example, if you want to be a part of this kind of small interest in small and local processing, consumers, that one of the reasons they're interested in that is they want to know where their cattle came from and who produced them and how were they produced. So if you want to capture that value that's being created there, you may have to give up a little bit of that autonomy and transparency. And maybe some people don't want to do it, but for those that will and are, I think there's a market opportunity. The other aspect I think of that is just the emergence of what you might call digital agriculture. The data that we can now collect on farm and even in beef cattle production is there. I think the market channel is trying to, use this data to transmit information throughout the supply chain. And you're going to have large market intermediaries, whether it's a Walmart or even potentially a packer. They're trying to make pledges to, reduce, say, climate emissions. It may become a market access issue. If you want to participate in certain supply chains, there may come a day where it's expected that you're going to be able to provide information that is more transparent than we've perhaps seen in the past.
There for you, the lead-off speaker at K-State's virtual Cattlemen's Day last Friday. From Purdue University, the head of its agricultural economics department, Jayson Lusk. Be watching for the videos of his and all of the other Cattlemen's Day presentations being posted online for viewing soon at asi.ksu.edu/Cattlemen's Day. We'll be back with more for you after these moments away. You're tuned to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, now in its 97th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson here, and now it's on to today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack did not offer a timeline to farmers on Friday regarding when the USDA would be releasing the frozen aid funds or announcing the next direct aid programs to producers that have already been passed by Congress. Vilsack spoke on Friday in the closing general session to participants in the virtual Commodity Classic event. At least some aid programs for producers were frozen for review when President Biden took office. Vilsack, who was confirmed last week, said the department continues to look at those programs. The USDA's Rod Bain has more.
It has been one of the first items of business for Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack since his return to office last week. Consideration of COVID-19-based relief plans. Offering an update Friday at Commodity Classic on review of aspects of the coronavirus food assistance program.
We're in the process of completing that analysis here, and I expect and anticipate within the next several weeks we're going to be in a position to let folks know, at least preliminarily, what our thoughts are as we go forward with these COVID relief packages.
Analysis including the amount of relief previously received for various commodities and those that received little or no assistance. The Secretary added that part of the consideration includes what may be available resource-wise.
We wanted to make sure that we understood and appreciated the full range of need and the full range of resources that might potentially be available before we made decisions about how best to allocate those resources.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, the Secretary said previous aid packages have helped some, but not all of those in the supply chain receive aid to get through the crisis. The USDA continues to conduct that review of CFAP and its different forms crafted under the Trump administration. But again, there is no specific date for when relief will be released or new forms of aid will be rolled out. Now, the new aid bill provides more than $5 billion for the USDA to focus on the food supply chain and the pandemic response. That bill that was passed over the weekend. There also remains that aid in the $900 billion package that passed Congress back in December that's held up by the USDA review. That includes a $20 per acre payment for non-specialty crop producers based on 2020 planted acres. Another provision of that bill provided nearly $1 billion in support for dairy producers as well. The bill also included a provision for livestock producers that reimbursed up to 80% of losses due to euthanizing animals when the supply chain was backed up last year. Part of that evaluation now is looking at what the demand is and determining who has not been helped or not helped adequately enough, according to Vilsack. He pointed to industries that have been relatively left out of earlier aid packages, such as the biofuels industry and certain specialty crops. Separately on Friday, the USDA extended its application deadline to April the 9th for producers to apply for the Quality Loss Adjustment Disaster Aid. That program set up to help producers who suffered quality crop losses in 2018 and 2019 disasters. The USDA has received about 8,100 applications under that program so far. Well, USDA analysts expect the producers this year will boost modestly their plantings of corn and soybeans, but one other crop could see a major increase in acreage. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
The two-year trend toward more and more grain sorghum acreage in the U.S. is likely to continue this year. In 2020, producers boosted acreage by 12% at about 5.6 million acres, and for this year,
we expect a strong increase in area planted at 7.2 million acres.
7.2 million. USDA analyst Justin Cho says that would be a 28% increase from last year. And of course, one reason for this heightened interest in sorghum.
Sorghum prices have been skyrocketing in the last couple of months.
That would do it. Now, with average yields, that 7.2 million acres would give us a potential crop of 441 million bushels, about 18% more than last year.
Almost all of this increase will go directly to export.
And more specifically,
to China directly.
The demand for U.S. sorghum in China has been very strong, helping to keep sorghum prices also strong. Of course, these plantings numbers are just educated guesses, but we'll soon hear from farmers themselves on their sorghum intentions when USDA releases its prospective plantings report March 31st. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And the USDA has just released now its report on Kansas wheat varieties, those planted this past fall and are growing currently. SY Monument is the top variety, acreage-wise, for the third consecutive year. It accounts for 9.4% of the state's 2021 wheat planted acres. WB Grainfield ranks second at 5.5%, Zinda in third at 4.7%, and the fourth most popular variety, T158, at 3.1%. The only hard white variety in the top 10, Joe, is in fifth place at 2.8% of the acreage. Winterhawk dropped to sixth place at 2.7%. The largest mover was the variety Bob Dole, rising from 26th place last year to 7th place at 2.4% of the acreage. LCS Chrome and TAM 114, 8th and 9th respectively, with 2.4% of the planted acres each, and Everest rounds out the top 10 at 1.9%. Area planted with blended varieties, not included in the rankings by variety, but blends accounting for 9.8% of the state's planted acreage. That's down from 11% the previous year. Hard white varieties accounting for 5.3% of the state's acreage. That's up from 4.2% last year. The Kansas Wheat Commission, by the way, funds the data collection and publication of this Kansas Wheat Varieties Report. And a quick calendar item to remind you about: the Kansas Junior Meat Goat Producer Week that's being organized by K-State Research and Extension will be coming up in mid-March for youth and families involved in that enterprise. This will be hosted virtually as a week-long educational series, March the 15th through the 20th. There will be 2 sessions hosted by Zoom the evening of Tuesday, March the 16th, 2 on Thursday, March the 18th, and the remaining sessions on that following Saturday morning, March the 20th. All ages and knowledge levels are invited to take part in this, covering many topics, including selection, nutrition and feeding, livestock guardian dogs, health, grooming and clipping, showmanship, and the state livestock nomination process. The program is free this year, but all attendees, including youth and adults, must register online, and that registration deadline is, in fact, today, March the 8th. So to find out more about the Kansas Junior Meat Goat Producer Week, March the 15th through the 20th, and how to register, go to asi.ksu.edu. If you look to the right-hand side of that page, you'll see the link to that event, asi.ksu.edu. Our 4-H segment for this week is next on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth enrolled in the Horse Project area will soon be able to learn more about professional opportunities through a video series produced by Kansas State University and Texas A&M. Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen says the 5-part video series produced at the K-State Horse Unit on the north side of the Manhattan campus features equine experts at both universities talking about the path to a successful career. Anissa, there is an advanced series of videos on the equine project area that will be of interest to those, especially those considering maybe a career in equine.
That's right. We are so excited that we were able to partner with Amanda Park from Texas A&M Collin County and Dr. Sterling Buse from our KSU Horse Unit to be able to create an equine reproduction educational video series. This is a video series that not only will have a 5-part stallion series talking about reproduction and the breeding process, but then the best part is there will also be a multi-part mare series that includes foaling that actually is housed at the KSU Horse Unit.
So this is quite advanced. This is not your cartoonish type stuff. This is real academic.
Right. We have so many equine project members that are really interested in pursuing a career or their own breeding program. So we wanted to develop a series that really is focused on that embryo to equine. So the youth that watch these videos would really be ones that are interested in learning more about what veterinarians and breeding managers look at when they are looking at starting their breeding season and what goes into selecting stallions and mares for a breeding program, and all the really technical aspects of this project area.
The video series is done, but it has not been released yet. It's coming out later this month, and that kind of all ties in with all of the other equine things that are going on across the state.
So as you know, COVID, of course, threw a few wrenches in our normal activities that we have in the equine project area. So we took advantage of maybe not the best circumstances and have created an equine panorama extravaganza that will kick off on March 22nd with the release of these videos. And then there will be a month-long equine focus on our Facebook page. There will be tons of resources and activities that youth can do, all related to the equine project area. And that will all wrap up the weekend of April 24th and 25th as we finalize our last contest in the equine project area. So we're really excited to be able to offer so many new adventures for those that are really interested in the equine project area. And the activities that we will have will be from those beginning equine project members all the way up to those advanced equine project members with our video series.
And that video series, we might mention, also is something that they will fill out a Qualtrics form for with their parents, making sure that this is something that they're really interested in and want to view these videos.
Yeah, so there's two reasons. We just want parents to be aware that this is a really advanced series and that we want to make sure that they're aware of what their youth are participating in. And then also, we just really need to collect some data so we can determine if these are things that our horse and equine project members want to see from the Kansas 4-H horse project area. We have such a great resource with our KSU horse unit that we just want to make sure that we're developing things that really can fit into what our equine project members want.
Tell me a little bit more about how this came about and I guess really how you were able to get this done, because I'm assuming that a series like this is pretty complicated in terms of getting it on film.
So we're really lucky, again, like I said, to partner with Amanda Park from Texas A&M Collin County. And luckily we have really invested members at our KSU horse unit as well as our equine coordinator, Shannon Rogge, and they were able to utilize the KSU horse unit to make videos. They did all of the production. It's just been a really good partnership across those state lines, and it's a really good reminder of how many great resources we have within our extension system. We couldn't have done this without Texas A&M, and Texas A&M couldn't have done it without us, so it's just really great to get different perspectives, to really be able to share these experiences with youth across Texas and Kansas.
And as we move into this month-long series of equine, what will be some of the things that will be going on in terms of things that are judged? How will they be judged? Will they be in person, virtual? How are we going to do this?
We're really excited that most of our contests that we host will be able to be done virtually. We'll be doing all of the same activities that youth would have experienced at Panorama and at our equine extravaganza. The only activity that will be in person will be our horse judging, and that will be at the Kansas State Fairgrounds the last part of April. Everything else will be done virtually. There's information going out by the end of this week so that youth can start signing up. I know that they've been anxiously working on ad development and their presentations and demonstrations, so there will just be a lot of opportunities to continue to do those things in the virtual format.
All of these will be judged, and they'll have some of these are then state qualifiers?
Yeah, so it's super exciting because our quiz bowl and our horse judging, as well as our senior presentations and demonstrations, also can qualify for national competition. So these state qualifiers will be done in the same way they would have been done live so that these teams and these individuals can go on to national competition.
You mentioned that you'd be doing some Facebook posts as well. What are some of the things you're going to cover there? Just upcoming events or maybe some facts about equine? What's planned for the Facebook aspect?
So we just have a lot of really great information we want to share. We want to make sure people are aware of resources they can access throughout the state. We have some really great equine programs in our local units, so we'll hopefully be highlighting some of the work that our agents and local units will be doing. We'll be sharing national curriculum. We'll also be sharing some of our partner curriculum with other states that have really great equine 4-H programs. And then we'll also be doing some fun quizzes and things where people can share their experiences that they've had in the equine project area. There's nothing better than seeing everybody's first ride after a long winter or their first foal. So we really want to make sure that it's just a really interactive month, sharing all of our love for horse.
That's Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen. For more information on the Horse Project area, visit kansas4h.org or contact your county or district extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.